Hi everyone, I'm Mark Harrison and this is a history of Rome. Written evidence for Rome's early years is, for the most part, missing. Archaeology informs us that the city grew from small farming settlements scattered around the Seven Hills. But for 1st century BC historian Livy and his contemporaries, the beginnings of Rome were much less mundane. And it is this traditional legendary tale that we shall use to tell of the city's beginnings, for it is this that shaped what Rome would become. The story begins with the fall of Troy. As the Greeks put the city to the sword and the flame, one man, Aeneas, with his family and a loyal group made good their escape. Taking to the sea, they sailed west, eventually arriving off the coast of Sicily. There, tragedy struck. While searching for a suitable place to make landfall, Anchises, Aeneas' father, died. But for the group, there was little time to mourn, for soon they found themselves battling a great storm that had been sent against them by the goddess Juno. Forced south, they eventually arrived at the port city of Carthage, whose queen was its legendary founder, Dido, and there they took refuge. And in all good boy meets girl stories, it wasn't long before Dido and Aeneas were in the grips of a torrid love affair. In fact, so enamoured had Dido become that she even went so far as to propose that they should unite their people and rule as joint monarchs. But the gods of this tale are fickle, and soon they had different ideas for Aeneas. Jupiter sent his messenger Mercury to get the travellers back on their journey by compelling them to leave Carthage. And thus one night, under this divine influence, Aeneas and his companions secretly fled. The following day, upon hearing the news, a distraught Dido screamed betrayal and uttered a curse that would forever pit her descendants against those of Aeneas. Then she took the sword that he had given her as a gift and ended her own life. Once more at sea, the Trojans sailed north, initially landing in Sicily, where they held funeral games in honour of Anchises. Then they returned to their boats and continued their journey up the Italian coast, where they finally made landfall in Latium. Upon landing, they were met and welcomed by its king Latinus, who generously invited them to settle. Latinus, being greatly impressed by Aeneas, decided to offer him the hand of his daughter Lavinia, but to do so meant breaking off her current betrothal to Turnus, the king of the Rutuli. His honour at stake, Turnus began plotting revenge. Gathering an army, he challenged Aeneas, but the force Aeneas mustered proved to be the stronger, and he was triumphant. Aeneas now turned his attention to giving his people a permanent home, and to that end he founded a new city which he called Lavinium in honour of his wife. Now, at this point, the legendary narrative abruptly ceases, and we leave the story of Aeneas and move forward 12 generations to the 8th century BC and to his direct descendant Numitor, the king of Alba Longa, who, as the tale begins again, has just been deposed by his younger brother Amulius. The now king Amulius was looking to secure his new position by ensuring that Numitor had no male descendants, thus preventing anyone in the future from that line from having a legitimate claim to the throne. To achieve this, he first killed Numitor's only son before forcing his daughter Rhea Silvia to become a Vestal virgin. And as Vestals had to swear an oath of celibacy, Amulius now believed himself secure from the future threat. This neat little solution, however, did not last long, as in all good tales of this kind, the gods once again intervened to undo the plans of mortal man. It all began when Rhea Silvia was collecting water from the sacred grove of Mars. The god, who just happened to be around at the time, spotting an opportunity, forced himself upon the hapless young woman. The deed having been done, he did, however, offer her some comfort by promising her that any offspring of the union, being the children of a god, would achieve great things. Nature took its course, and 9 months later Rhea Silvia gave birth to twins, who we know as Romulus and Remus. Now, for a Vestal virgin, the bearing of children was sacrilegious, and at the moment of its happening, it was said that an incensed Vesta deemed to put out her own sacred fire. and it wasn't only the goddess of whom Rhea Silvia had incurred the wrath. Upon hearing the news, her uncle King Romulus immediately had her imprisoned before ordering the death of the twins. His chosen method of infanticide was to have them abandoned on the banks of the river Tiber. But once again his plans were foiled by divine intervention, and this time in the guise of Tiberinus, who kept them alive until a she-wolf who had recently lost her own pups adopted them and suckled them. For some time the she-wolf cared for them, before eventually they were found by a man called Faustulus, a shepherd who pitied them, picked them up, took them home, and together with his wife raised them as his own. Time passed, and they grew to manhood, and as they did they became more and more interested in politics. One instance from this time saw them involved in a dispute over the relative merits of Romulus and Numitor. The consequence of this involvement was the arrest and imprisonment of Remus, which forced Romulus to undertake a daring rescue. It is unclear how, but it was during this time living oats that the twins finally became aware of their true lineage, and that armed with this knowledge they joined forces with Numitor, who they helped to slay Romulus and to retake the throne. Despite now being heirs to the throne of Alba Longa, the twins decided to leave and to find their own destiny. Travelling northwest, they arrived at an area of 7 hills and decided that it was the perfect place to found a new city. Once there, however, the brothers could not agree on where the foundation should be laid. Romulus favoured the Palatine, whilst Remus preferred the Aventine. In order to resolve the dispute, they agreed to consult the gods through the use of augury, a method of interpreting omens for the future. Remus was the first to claim the favour of the gods when he saw 6 birds fly over his chosen site. But shortly after, Romulus saw double that number above him, and thus he claimed victory. The dispute thus remained unresolved, and the rivalry of the two grew in intensity, eventually culminating in tragedy. The brothers finally came to blows, and the result was Remus' death at the hands of Romulus. Following this act of fratricide, Romulus founded his new city. It would be called Rome, and he would be its first king. Legend records this date as being the 21st of April, 753 BC. From the start, the settlement was open to all, whether they were freeman or slave, rich or poor, educated or not. And as a result, the population grew quickly. But there was one major fly in the ointment. The survival of the city obviously depended on further generations, and that was something that was in doubt. You see, the new city had attracted many men, but suffered from a lack of women of childbearing age. And so, in an attempt to try and address the problem, the Romans petitioned the neighbouring tribes for women as wives. Their neighbours, however, were reluctant. Many were already nervous about the growing strength of this new city and did not wish to strengthen it further. Desperate, the Romans then looked to a new strategy. They invited their neighbours to Rome to celebrate the festival of Neptune Equesta, and this invitation was accepted in good faith. But it had not been offered in good faith, for once the festivities were in full swing, Romulus made a prearranged signal and the Romans struck. They attacked their unprepared guests and took captive a large number of Sabine women. The Sabines and their allies were outraged by this act of treachery and vowed revenge. The first to attack were the Caninenses, followed by the Atemnites and then the Crustumini. But on each occasion they were soundly beaten by their Roman opponents who, having repelled each assault, then counter-attacked and went on to capture the towns of their adversaries. However, despite these initial successes, Rome faced an altogether different proposition when the Sabines put forward a more unified force. They also changed tactics. Rather than assault the city itself, they attacked the Roman citadel on the Capitoline Hill. And in this, they were successful. Yet it must be noted that this success was achieved less through force of arms than it was through betrayal, for it was the daughter of the citadel's governor Tarpeia who gave them the advantage. In the hope of attracting personal reward, she opened the gates to the attacking army, allowing them to catch the defenders off guard and swiftly capture the fortification. Tarpeia, for her part though, never did receive her reward, for she was crushed to death as the troops rushed through. And her treachery would never be forgotten by the Romans. They gave her name to the Tarpeian Rock, where, from then on, those convicted of serious crimes will be thrown to their death. And with the citadel now breached, the defenders fell back to the Latium gate and regrouped. Romulus, in the thick of battle, rallied his men and led a counter-attack. The fighting was fierce. But in the middle of the slaughter, Livy notes that 30 of the women that had been taken at the feast suddenly threw themselves between the combatants and implored them to stop, declaring that they did not wish to see their fathers and husbands die at the hands of one another. Shocked, the men stopped fighting, and under pressure from the women, eventually began talking. The result was an agreement to peace and to combine the two tribes into a single entity, and for Romulus and Titus Titius, the Sabine king, to rule jointly. And this they did until Titius' death 5 years later. Those Sabines that followed their king chose to settle on the Capitoline Hill, but those that did not would continue to resist the growing power of Rome. This conflict with the Sabines was not the only dispute on Rome's borders. As the city expanded, the Romans also began to encounter problems with their Etruscan neighbours to the north. The city of Fidense, looking to curb Rome's ambitions, attacked its lands, laying waste to much of them. To counter that threat, Romulus set a trap. Raising an army, he moved only part of it close to Fidense, and looked to tempt the Fidenates to sally out to meet him, whilst hiding the rest of his force to the left and right. Confident from what they could see that they had the numbers to win, the defenders took the bait. Once engaged, however, they soon found themselves attacked on three sides as the rest of Romulus' men left their concealment and joined the battle. The defenders were quickly crushed and Fidense fell into Roman hands. Veii, another Etruscan town, also worried about Rome and also began raiding its territory. The Romans responded in the same ways they had with Fidense by sending an army to Veii to offer battle. This was accepted, and again the Romans were victorious. This time, however, they were unable to capture the settlement and instead resorted to plundering the surrounding lands. The Veientes, unable to halt the destruction, eventually offered to negotiate. The subsequent treaty forced them to cede much of their land to Rome. Now, Romulus' achievements on the battlefield may have been substantial, but also noteworthy was his political settlement. This included the creation of the Senate, a body of the noblest men that were to act as an advisory council, and the first body of lictors, who were 12 in number and were a sort of cross between a civil servant and a bodyguard for the king. The Roman horsemen, equites, he divided into 3 divisions, one for each of the founding tribes. Finally, he instigated a system of voting that was to be done in popular assemblies known as the Comitia Curiata. For this purpose, he divided the population into 30 curiae. It was a number that was chosen to honour the 30 women who had intervened to stop the Roman-Sabine War. It was clear that Rome was here to stay, but as for its founder, his time was finite. Romulus' death, when it came in 717 BC, was as legendary as his life. Whilst reviewing troops at the Campus Martius, he is said to have suddenly disappeared in a whirlwind, one which eventually carried him to Mount Olympus, where he would become the god Quirinus. The time of the first king was over. He had founded a new city. He had led that city to prove itself in battle against hostile neighbours. He had established a working political system, and he had created a stable and organised society. Rome had arrived, and for the future there was everything to play for. If you like our work, please help by subscribing, pressing the bell button and commenting. And we'll see you next time on A History of Rome.